The series begins with a girl named Oh Hanai who's taking a nap under a tree. So, while she's sleeping, this good-looking guy named Buck Sumjo comes up to her and plants a kiss on her. Soon after, Hanai wakes up, but instead of seeing him, she spots a white horse not too far away. Then, she decides to follow the horse as it trots into the woods, and suddenly, she runs into Sumjo there. He's got this grin on his face, and he starts moving closer like he's going to kiss her. Seeing him like that, Hanai starts getting all bashful and closes her eyes, ready for the smooch. But in reality, Hanai, who was daydreaming about kissing Sumjo, wakes up abruptly in the school garden. The bell rings and she hurries to class, managing to sneak in just before it begins. During lunch break, Hanai has her meal in the school cafeteria with her pals Jung Ju-rae and Dak Go-mina. At that time, they're chatting about how they always struggle with their tests, while some other students in the cafeteria are gossiping about how Sumjo always ranks first in school. Not long after, a bunch of girls got all excited when they spotted Sumjo walking into the cafeteria. Hanai, who thought he was coming her way, started to feel nervous, but it turned out he was just heading for the vending machine to grab a drink. She sighed in relief. However, when Sumjo put his coin in and selected a drink, the vending machine refused to give him his drink. That's when Hong Jangmai, a girl who had a crush on Sumjo, called Hanai for help. Feeling a bit shy, Hanai approached the stubborn vending machine and gave it a kick or two until Sumjo's chosen drink finally dropped down. At that time, she couldn't help but blush and look away from Sumjo because she felt embarrassed about what she had just done. But funny thing is, he just strolled away, not showing any gratitude, which annoyed Hanai's friends. In fact, Ju-rae even loudly called Hanai's name as a hint for Sumjo to thank her. Hearing Ju-rae shout, Sumjo turned back and approached Hanai, who was still feeling silent and embarrassed. He just grabbed his change from the vending machine and left without acknowledging her, leaving her a bit annoyed. Another day, Hanai was hanging out in the art room with her friends, and they were still chatting about Sumjo. Ju-rae and Mina, who knew about Hanai's crush on Sumjo, encouraged her to confess her feelings because graduation was approaching fast. With her friends' support, Hanai felt determined to confess her love to him right away. Meanwhile, Vice Principal Wang was giving a hard time to Song Kang-yi, who was Hanai's homeroom teacher. He was upset because Hanai and her friends were at the bottom of the class rankings. He even suggested that Hanai and her friends should skip their exams to prevent their grades from embarrassing the school. Not too long after, Sumjo walked into the teacher's room to get his assignment book, and Vice Principal Wang noticed him. At that time, Wang praised Sumjo, who was considered a brilliant student at the school. After school, Hanai always helped her dad, Ki-dong, run their shop. As closing time approached, she found herself daydreaming about how to express her feelings to Sumjo. Ki-dong, who knew his daughter was in love, suggested that she write a love letter to the guy she liked. Taking her dad's advice to heart, Hanai said her goodbyes and headed home. The next day at school, Sumjo stumbled upon a letter tucked into his locker. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Hanai and her friends chatted about the letter she had sent to Sumjo. She hoped he would reach out to her because she had included her name and phone number in the letter. Around that time, Sumjo called out Hanai's name from upstairs and handed her a letter. She seemed really happy receiving it, especially since many people were watching them in the cafeteria. Unfortunately, when Hanai opened the letter, she realized it was her own letter that she had given to him earlier, but it had been graded by him. Sumjo then mentioned that he didn't like girls who make mistakes in writing, as he found many errors in her love letter. Without paying much attention to Hanai's disappointment, Sumjo walked away. This prompted Bon Joon-gu, who couldn't stand to see the girl he liked being embarrassed, to shout at Sumjo and ask him to apologize to her. However, Sumjo refused to apologize and ended up dodging a punch from Joon-gu. Not too long after the argument, Wang noticed the commotion and blamed Joon-gu. He even told a student who appeared mischievous to go to his office immediately, despite Joon-gu's attempts to explain the situation. At that time, Wang seemed to favor Sumjo and believed that he could do no wrong. After that incident, Hanai became the talk of the school, with students making fun of her for being rejected by Sumjo. One day, Hanai and her father, who lived alone, faced a disaster that left them without a place to stay. Joon-gu and the others started a donation drive for Hanai. When Joon-gu noticed that Sumjo seemed indifferent to Hanai's predicament, he urged the school's top student to make a contribution. Reluctantly, Sumjo took out his wallet and intended to give some money, but Hanai unexpectedly turned down his offer. In the evening, Haney's father, Kdong, invited her to temporarily stay at his friend's house until they found a new place to live. When they arrived at the friend's house, Hanai was surprised to see that it was quite large and luxurious. Then, after Kdong rang the doorbell and they entered, they were warmly welcomed by Bak Suchong and his wife, Wang Jumi. Suchong, upon seeing Haney, complimented her, saying she looked even prettier than in the photo. Hearing that, making her feeling confused until Jumi admitted that she had visited Haney's school to take her picture. Hearing this, Hanai realized that the woman she had seen at school was Jumi. Then, after a short chat, Hanai went outside to retrieve her luggage, which was still in the car. She got quite the surprise when Sungjo, the eldest son of Suchong and Jumi, arrived. It was a shock for her to realize that she would be living under the same roof as the guy she liked. Not long after, Jumi asked them to come inside the house using the intercom at the front of the house. In the living room, Kdong expressed his gratitude to Suchang's family for accommodating him and his daughter. Jumi then introduced Baek Unjo, Sungjo's younger brother, to Kdong and Haney and encouraged her second son to greet them. Unjo, however, rejected her, saying that Hanai looked foolish. Feeling uncomfortable, Jumi playfully tapped Unjo on the head for his impolite comment, making everyone laugh at her playful gesture. Unjo then asked Hanai a question, but unfortunately, she couldn't answer it, fueling his suspicion about her intelligence. Hearing that, Suchang then asked his son to apologize, but Unjo refused, stating that he doesn't like people he considers stupid. In that moment, Hanai was truly shocked by this, especially since both brothers in the family had labeled her as unintelligent. A little while later, Jumi invited Haney to check out her room, which turned out to be quite spacious, leaving Haney pleasantly surprised. Then, Jumi confessed that she had always wanted a daughter, so Haney's arrival at their house brought her a lot of joy. While they were chatting, Sungjo showed up carrying Haney's things, and Jumi decided to leave the room, giving some privacy to them. As Haney packed her stuff, Sungjo seemed irritated and mentioned that he had to share a room with his younger brother, now that Hanai had moved in, and hearing that made Haney feel guilty. Then she apologized, but he brushed it off and cautioned her not to spread news about them living in the same house. Shortly after Sungjo left, Haney felt happy about living with him, even if they had to share the bathroom. In the morning, Hanai had breakfast with all of Sungjo's family members. She couldn't help but keep glancing at him, which led her to choke on her food. Unjo called her stupid when this happened. Then, just as Sungjo was about to leave, Jumi discreetly signaled to Hanai to go with him. She quickly followed and accidentally bumped into Sungjo. There, he stopped in his tracks and warned her not to go to school together in the future. At school, Hanai sneaked a peek into a special study room meant for the top 50 students. This room had better study resources than regular classes. She secretly watched Sungjo, who was engrossed in reading a book. Hanai felt annoyed when Jang Mei, a classmate of Sungjo's, deliberately asked him for help with practice questions. She couldn't help but be jealous of Jang Mei, who was both beautiful and smart, and didn't face the same indifference from Sungjo as Hanai did. Later that evening, Jumi came to Hanai's room to offer her a snack. She noticed Hanai studying diligently and mentioned that Sungjo never studied as hard as Hanai did cause he usually preferred to sleep. Hanai was surprised to hear this, especially since Sungjo had always achieved perfect scores. Shortly afterward, Jumi showed Sungjo a childhood photo. The following day at school, Hanai continued to chuckle about the childhood photo of Sungjo she had. To her surprise, Sungjo called her from the front of the classroom and asked her to fetch his sports clothes. This left all the students quite surprised and curious about why he was calling Hanai. Hanai quickly grabbed her tracksuit, only to realize that their tracksuits had been swapped. Sungjo then invited her to the school garden to exchange the sports clothes they had brought, all while Hanai's friends watched them secretly from the classroom window. During this exchange, Hanai suddenly showed him the childhood photo, which shocked him. He tried to grab the photo from her, but she proposed a deal. She offered to return the photo if Sungjo helped her study for an upcoming exam, allowing her to access the special study room. Initially, Sungjo declined, citing the tight schedule with the exam just a week away. However, Hanai threatened to show the photo to the students of school, which rattled him. Then he pushed her against a tree, expressing his suspicions about her desire to always be close to him. Hanai then lied, claiming she no longer had feelings for Sungjo, but he didn't fully believe her confession. To tease her, he pretended as if he was about to kiss her, which caused a commotion among Hanai's classmates, including Jung-gu, who screamed when they witnessed the scene. Later, when they were having dinner at home, Sung-jo finished his meal and hurried to his room. Hae-nae immediately followed him, leaving everyone at the dinner table puzzled by their behavior. Shortly after, Sung-jo found himself in Hae-nae's room, attempting to help her with her studies. Unfortunately, she couldn't quite grasp the material because she was too distracted by Sung-jo's handsome face. Sung-jo grew increasingly frustrated, but he couldn't do anything about it since Hae-nae threatened to share his childhood photos. His anger got the best of him, and he ended up shouting at Hae-nae, which was overheard by everyone who was secretly eavesdropping behind Hae-nae's bedroom door. This annoyed Eun-jo towards her. Fortunately, Soo-chang promptly took his son away from Hae-nae's room. After their study session, Hae-nae tried to sleep but remembered Sung-jo's advice to focus on a black dot on her ceiling. However, instead of concentrating on the dot, she found herself daydreaming about his face. The next evening, Sung-jo pushed Hae-nae to study even though she was feeling sleepy. Not long after, she spotted Sung-jo asleep at the table, exhausted from teaching her. When Jung-gi came to check on her son, she found both of them dozing off at the table. She couldn't resist taking out her camera to capture the moment. On the day of the exam, Sung-jo passed by Hae-nae and unexpectedly gave her some words of encouragement. Hae-nae was taken aback by this, but she also felt happy that he was paying attention to her. When the exam began, Hae-nae, who had studied with Sung-jo, found herself able to answer all the exam questions confidently. A few days later, the exam results were finally revealed, and with excitement, Hae-nae checked Sung-jo's perfect score. She felt relieved that he still held the top spot, even though he had been sleep-deprived in the days leading up to the exam while helping her study. On the other hand, Sung-jo went to check the notice board to see which students had made it into the special class. After finding all the names of the special class students, he walked away from the exam results board. When Hae-nae approached him, he congratulated her for making it into the special class. Hae-nae hurriedly checked the list and was delighted to see her name there, even though she was ranked 50th. On another occasion, Hae-nae bumped into Sung-jo, who asked her for a childhood photo. In the moment, she misunderstood his outstretched hand, thinking he wanted to hold hers, and quickly pulled away, only to realize he was actually asking for a childhood picture. Then, she handed over the photo to Sung-jo and hurriedly walked away. When her fellow students at school learned about Hae-nae making it into the special class, some of them tried to spread gossip and say negative things about her. She tried her best to ignore the rumors and went to her special class. Upon arriving, Hae-nae was surprised by the quiet atmosphere in the room. She took a seat next to Seo Yuri and attempted to say hello, but Yuri simply moved away. During class, Hae-nae burst into laughter when Jang Mi tried to get closer to Sung-jo by offering him a drink, which he refused. This incident left Hae-nae feeling embarrassed, and she quickly covered her face with her textbook after being scolded by Wang, who was the teacher. The next day, during his sports class, Hae-nae and Sung-jo ended up on different relay teams, and it seemed like they were competing with each other. However, because she couldn't focus and could only think about Sung-jo, she ended up accidentally giving her team's baton to him. Jung-gu, who was on the same team as her, shouted at her to give him the baton and tried to catch up with Sung-jo. Unfortunately, he couldn't beat Sung-jo, who had strong athletic abilities. After their sports class ended, Hae-nae told Sung-jo that he was really lucky to be good at both school stuff and sports. Sung-jo then casually bragged to her about how good he was at basketball and swimming. Hae-nae, who heard this, got a bit annoyed because he was basically showing off. Then, one day there was some gossip going around school about a picture of Hae-nae and Sung-jo sleeping at a table. It got spread because Jung-gi posted it on her blog. Hae-nae already knew about it, but she felt super embarrassed when everyone started talking about it. Finally, Sung-jo found out that it was his mom who posted the picture on her blog. He saw Hae-nae hanging out with her friends at home and scolded her about the photo getting out there. Soon after, Jung-gi stepped in and defended Hae-nae, saying she was the one who posted it, not her. So Sung-jo asked his mom to take it down, but Jung-gi refused because she liked having those pictures on her blog. At that time, Sung-jo got frustrated with his mom and decided to just go to his room. On another occasion, Hae-nae felt really awkward when she walked past Sung-jo just as he had come out of the bathroom. He was still mad at her and had been treating her poorly, even making her cry in the bathroom. A little while later, Sung-jo was in his room, still looking annoyed as he read his mom's blog, which had become the talk of the school. Suddenly, he heard Hae-nae's voice from the next room. She was talking to her friend and admitting that Sung-jo had every right to be mad because of those photos circulating. After she finished the call, Han-ni sat by the window, reminiscing about the time she had spent with Sung-jo. The next evening, Sung-jo was taken by surprise when he saw Han-ni, who wasn't known for her cooking skills, trying to make dinner for the two of them. His parents and Yeonjo had gone out. At that time, Sung-jo looked a bit annoyed at Han-ni's cooking, which he thought wasn't good enough to eat. So he ended up taking over and making dinner for both of them. Han-ni just smiled, appreciating his help. Meanwhile, Jung-hee and the others decided to go to karaoke after having dinner at a restaurant. She did this on purpose so that Sung-jo and Han-ni could have some time alone at home to patch things up. As for Han-ni, she was searching for her English book until she realized that Sung-jo had borrowed it. This threw her into a panic, as she had written a lot about him in that book. Soon after, she rushed to her room to look for the English book. When Han-ni entered Sung-jo's room, he was fast asleep, which gave her the chance to search for the book. However, just as she found it, Sung-jo suddenly grabbed her arm, causing her to tumble onto the bed. Then, he ended up on top of her, getting very close to her face. Meanwhile, Jung-hee and the others had returned home, and Yeonjo hurried to her room. Sung-jo, who had spotted Han-ni, began to feel flustered. He chuckled and then decided to sit on the sofa. Shortly after, Han-ni quickly got up and left the room, feeling embarrassed about being teased by him. She didn't realize that she had left her English book behind. At the same time, Eunjo, who was about to enter his room, went silent when he saw Han-ni emerging from his older brother's room. He especially noticed his older brother laughing at Han-ni's English book, which was covered in doodles. Meanwhile, Han-ni was in her room, crying after feeling like she had been toyed with by Sung-jo. Sometime later, Sung-jo fell sick, so Han-ni brought food to his room and left it outside his door. After Han-ni left, Sung-jo grabbed the food and found a box with a fork and some encouraging words, wishing him a quick recovery so he could take his university entrance exam the next day. This brought a smile to his face. The next morning, Han-ni and the others felt relieved when they saw Sung-jo coming down from his room to take his university exams for the day. Once in the exam room, he began reading the questions. However, since he hadn't fully recovered, Sung-jo couldn't read the questions clearly. The medicine he had taken also made him feel drowsy. The exam supervisor noticed that he had dozed off and woke him up to quickly finish the exam, which only had a few minutes left. In a rush, Sung-jo filled in all the questions. A few days later, Sung-jo bid farewell as he headed for a university entrance interview. Han-ni secretly followed him from behind. As they both crossed the road, Han-ni accidentally collided with a man, causing the doll that Sung-jo had given her to fall in the middle of the road. At the same time, Sung-jo just smiled and acted like he didn't notice Han-ni following him. As for Han-ni, she was determined not to lose the doll that Sung-jo had given her, so she decided to pick it up from the road. Unfortunately, while trying to retrieve the doll, she got hit by a car. Sung-jo, who was initially unaware, was shocked to see a high school student in distress due to the accident. When he turned around, he realized that it was Han-ni who had been involved in the accident. At the hospital, Ki-dong was concerned about Han-ni, who had injured her leg. They were surprised to see Sung-jo there, since they thought he was supposed to be attending a university interview. While they were together, Han-ni apologized to Sung-jo for causing him to cancel his university interview, even though she felt like she was just a hindrance in his life. Shortly after, Jun-gu and some other friends came to visit Han-ni and started blaming Sung-jo. Han-ni quickly stopped them and asked her friends to leave him alone. She also requested that Sung-jo leave the treatment room and go home to rest. Sung-jo was taken aback by her request but couldn't refuse, even though he could see that Han-ni was crying. Back at home, Ki-dong apologized to Soo-chong and Jung-hee for Sung-jo's failed interview due to his daughter's accident. Even though Sung-jo's parents didn't seem too concerned, saying that they believed their son had other plans, Ki-dong still felt bad about the situation. Sometime later, after Han-ni had recovered and returned from the hospital, she sat in her room, contemplating all the things that had caused trouble for Sung-jo. She appeared sad and guilty until she quietly made the decision to leave Sung-jo's house. But as luck would have it, just as she was about to step out the door, Sung-jo suddenly appeared and handed her an envelope. Inside was an acceptance letter from the same university where she would be studying. And I hadn't expected that Sung-jo would choose to study at the same university. He thanked her for making him experience various things he had never felt before. That's why he asked her to stay in his house and brought her suitcase back to her room. Han-ni felt overjoyed that night and exclaimed her affection for him. Sung-jo, feeling a bit embarrassed, quickly retreated to his room. As she watched him go, Hanni smiled happily and kissed the doll he had given her. On graduation day, Jumi was busy getting Sungjo and Hanni ready. When Sungjo left the room, he was surprised by Hanni, who presented him with a large gift box. Before he could take it, Jumi arrived, so Sungjo decided to head downstairs. While doing so, he heard Hanni confess that she had bought the gift with her part-time job, just like he had been doing all this time. Sungjo seemed to smile happily upon realizing Hanni's sincerity. At school, the graduation ceremony began and Sungjo, being the top student in his class, delivered a speech on behalf of all the graduating students. Once the ceremony ended, students took photos together, and he posed for a picture with Hanni. Later that night, during the graduation party, Sungjo unexpectedly led Hanni to a quiet hallway and surprised her with a kiss. He told her he couldn't forget about her. Hanni was taken aback by his sudden affection, and then he left her. In that moment, Hanni felt happy and couldn't believe that she and Sungjo had just shared a kiss. The next morning in Hanni's room, she intentionally displayed her graduation photo with Sungjo and woke up feeling happy, recalling the kiss they shared the previous night. After realizing she had to go to campus that day, she rushed to the bathroom and accidentally bumped into Sungjo, who had just finished showering. They both felt awkward greeting each other because of what happened last night. Hanni, feeling embarrassed, even slipped in the bathroom, which added to her embarrassment in front of Sungjo, who hadn't left for his room yet. During breakfast with Sungjo's family, Jumi mentioned that she missed seeing both her son and Hanni in their school uniforms, now that they were university students. Shortly after finishing breakfast, Sungjo hurried off to campus, leaving Hanni to go alone, even though they were studying at the same place. She grumbled a bit because Sungjo had left her behind. However, her friends Jura and Minna, who were also attending the same university as Hanni, joined her. Soon after, the three of them strolled around their new campus, sharing jokes and laughs. As they were walking, Hanni almost got hit by a red sports car when she crossed the road. The driver of the car, a beautiful woman named Yoonhira, immediately got out to check on Hanni. Fortunately, Hanni doesn't get hurt, which relieved Hira. The next day, Hanni was having a chat with Sungjo when Hira unexpectedly joined them. She was surprised to see Hanni talking to Sungjo and jumped to the conclusion that they were dating. Hearing that, Sungjo immediately denied it, which left Hanni feeling disappointed by his response. Meanwhile, Hira, who seemed to have a crush on Sungjo, felt relieved to hear this and invited him to a cafe. Unfortunately, her hopes were dashed when Sungjo turned down the invitation. Hira grew even more irritated when she noticed Hanni laughing at her rejection, giving her a sarcastic look. Hanni, realizing Hira's condescending gaze, fell silent and uncomfortable. After returning home from campus, Hanni bumped into Sungjo and asked about Hira. There he playfully teased Hanni, suggesting that she might be jealous of Hira. He even got closer to Hanni, making her think he would kiss her again. But instead, he just smiled and walked away, leaving her feeling annoyed at his constant teasing. One day, Wang Kyung-soo, one of Sungjo and Hanni's classmates, invited Sungjo to join the campus tennis club. They wanted the club to compete with other tennis clubs on campus, and Kyung-soo had hopes that Sungjo could take the club to a national level. At that time, Sungjo initially declined, citing his lack of recent tennis practice. However, Kyung-soo persisted in persuading him until Sungjo finally agreed. Hanni, who sat behind Kyung-soo, eavesdropped on their conversation and decided she wanted to join the same club as Sungjo. A little later, Hanni stood in front of the tennis club room looking for Sungjo. Knowing she was following him, Sungjo purposely entered the club room through a different door. At that moment, Kyung-soo noticed Hanni still standing there and invited her into the club room. Feeling awkward, she entered and took a seat where Sungjo was sitting. Shortly after, Hiro also joined the tennis club and sat beside Hanni. When Hiro was about to greet Hanni, Sungjo told her to ignore Hanni so that she wouldn't feel upset. Sadly, this unfair treatment bothered Hanni, making her annoyed with Sungjo. When tennis practice began, Hanni was already on the tennis court, trying to practice on her own. However, she accidentally hit the ball towards Kyung-soo. Despite getting hit by the tennis ball, he didn't get angry with Hanni, who was still learning. Instead, he praised her effort and encouraged her. Around the same time, Sungjo and Hira, who had just arrived, laughed at Hanni's appearance, making her feel embarrassed and annoyed. Nevertheless, she chose to stay silent and didn't confront them. In the evening, there was a welcoming party for new tennis club members. Kyung-soo and others praised Sung-jo and Hira for their impressive tennis skills. One club member even mentioned that Sung-jo and Hira had been known for their tennis talent since high school and shared an interest in literature. This common interest had brought them closer, as they enjoyed discussing their shared passion. They raised their glasses and exchanged smiles. On the other hand, Han-nae and Kyung-soo couldn't help but feel annoyed by how close Sung-jo and Hira had become. Soon after, Han-nae was in the kitchen when she heard that Sung-jo had returned home. She hurried to greet him, but to her surprise, he invited Hira over. When Hira saw Han-nae at Sung-jo's house, she was shocked to realize that Sung-jo and Han-nae lived together. Sung-jo, seemingly unconcerned about Han-nae, then invited Hira to go up to his room, where they ran into Eun-jo. During that time, Hira also greeted Eun-jo, and he blushed when he saw the beautiful Hira. In the room, Hira and Sung-jo discussed various things for their college assignments. They seemed to enjoy each other's company as they talked about interesting topics. Meanwhile, Han-nae felt uneasy, thinking about Sung-jo alone with Hira. Then, she went to the balcony to calm down. But unexpectedly, Sung-jo and Hira also went to the balcony, forcing Han-nae to hide to avoid being seen. Unfortunately, she couldn't help but witness the closeness between Sung-jo and Hira, as they discussed a display that caught Hira's attention. At that time, Han-nae felt sad seeing the man she liked getting close to another woman. When she returned to her room, Han-nae looked at her graduation photo with Sung-jo and reminisced about the moments they had shared together. At the same time, unbeknownst to Han-nae, Sung-jo was secretly gazing at her bedroom door. The next day, after staying at his friend's place for a while, Ki-dong, who had found a new place to live, invited Han-nae to move out of Sung-jo's family house. When they bid farewell, Jung-mi couldn't hide her sadness at parting with Han-nae, whom she considered like a daughter. Han-nae also apologized to Sung-jo for the mess she had made, but he didn't respond to her apology. After Han-nae and Ki-dong left, Sung-jo entered the room that Han-nae had occupied and discovered the doll she had given him, intentionally left behind by her. He then returned to his room and found a gift box from Han-nae, which brought back memories of when he was sick just before his university exams. A few days later, the tennis club gathered for another meeting at a restaurant. During the meeting, Hira whispered something to Sung-jo and then waited for him outside. When Han-nae saw this, she got worried and suspected that Hira might confess her feelings to Sung-jo. In a hurry, Han-nae decided to follow them. Soon after, Sung-jo approached Hira outside and invited her to sit in the garden to discuss what she wanted to talk about. Secretly, Han-nae continued to watch them from behind a tree and accidentally ran into Kyung-soo, who was also following Hira. Since they had the same goal, they both hid behind a bush near a park bench. During their conversation, Hira confessed her feelings to Sung-jo. Unfortunately, before he could respond, he heard a noise from behind the bush. He turned to find Han-nae and Kyung-soo eavesdropping on their conversation. Then Sung-jo quickly grabbed Han-nae's hand and asked her to leave the place, leaving Hira disappointed, especially since she hadn't received an answer to her love confession. The next day, while Han-nae was practicing tennis, she sprained her leg. Knowing that, Sung-jo rushed over and offered to carry her on his back. Hira, seeing how attentive he was to another woman, felt jealous, especially since she had never received an answer to her own feelings. Sung-jo then carried Han-nae towards the exit, and she felt happy because of the attention he showed her. The following day, Han-nae went to Sung-jo's class to catch a glimpse of him. However, she arrived just as the class was ending, and many students were leaving. In a hurry, she hid behind a wall to avoid being seen by Sung-jo. During that time, she overheard Hira inviting Sung-jo to watch a movie at the cinema. Turns out, Sung-jo agreed, and Han-nae decided to follow them. To disguise herself and avoid being noticed, Han-nae wore a head covering and glasses while she continued to observe them buying snacks before the movie. Then, once Sung-jo and Hira had entered the cinema, Han-nae planned to follow them. But unexpectedly, she bumped into Kyung-soo, who was also secretly following Hira. At that time, they were both surprised, and Kyung-soo admitted that he liked Hira. He was aware of Han-nae's feelings for Sung-jo and suggested that they work together to prevent Sung-jo and Hira from getting closer. With their plan in mind, they hurried into the cinema and sat right behind Sung-jo and Hira. Meanwhile, Hira attempted to lean on Sung-jo's shoulder during the romantic movie they were watching. At the same time, Han-nae and Kyung-soo, aware of the situation, tried to thwart her plan and prevent Hira from resting her head on Sung-jo's shoulder. After the movie ended and they left the cinema, Hira was almost hit by someone, but Sungjo came to her rescue. This sight annoyed Kyung-soo, who was getting frustrated with the closeness between Sungjo and Hira. On the other hand, Hae-ni, feeling disheartened by it all, initially wanted to give up on their mission of keeping an eye on them. However, Kyung-soo convinced her to continue, and eventually she agreed. As they continued to follow Sungjo and Hira, Kyung-soo got into trouble when he accidentally spilled ice cream on a man's clothes, who turned out to be a member of a gang. Fearing trouble, Kyung-soo sought help from Sungjo, claiming that Sungjo was from a wealthy family. Sungjo initially seemed confused, but soon realized the man was a thug. Then, he signaled Kyung-soo to run away from the cinema. Kyung-soo understood, and on the count of 3, they ran in different directions. Shortly after, Sungjo took Hae-ni's hand, who was nearby, while Kyung-soo went to get Hira to leave the place. During that moment, Sungjo had a happy smile as he held Hae-ni's hand, urging her to run with him to escape the pursuing thugs. At that time, Hae-ni was pleasantly surprised that Sungjo chose to run with her, and she felt elated to be by the side of the man she liked. After running a good distance, they found refuge in a convenience store. Feeling safer, they emerged to chat. Hae-ni then apologized to Sungjo for following him while he was dating Hira, and assured him that she would be okay if he chose Hira as his girlfriend. However, Sungjo was suddenly irritated by her words and suggested they go to the lake. Soon after, they hopped onto a boat to enjoy the view from the middle of the lake, but Hae-ni accidentally stood in a way that caused the boat to tip, and both of them ended up falling into the water. Some time later, Hae-ni was seen sitting by the lake, trying to dry her hair. Sungjo approached her, offering a change of clothes. They changed and had a conversation while waiting for their clothes to dry. During this time, Hae-ni was curious about why Sungjo held her hand even though he was dating Hira. Sungjo seemed puzzled about how to explain, but he simply said that during the incident, Hae-ni was the closest person to him. Hae-ni smiled happily and thanked him for choosing her over Hira. Some time later, Sungjo escorted Hae-ni home, which made her feel like all their activities together were like dates. On the other hand, Hira and Kyung-soo were spotted having a meal together at a restaurant. There, Kyung-soo decided to be honest with Hira about his feelings and his desire to be closer to her. He acknowledged that he had many shortcomings compared to Sungjo, but assured Hira that he always tried to do his best for her. Unfortunately, she didn't seem interested in his feelings and quickly left, rejecting his offer to take her home. The next morning, Sungjo bumped into Hira as he was about to enter class. He asked about her well-being from the previous night and was relieved to hear that she had safely made it home with Kyung-soo's company. However, Hira felt jealous because Sungjo had chosen to spend time with Hae-ni instead of her. During tennis practice, Hae-ni gave Kyung-soo advice on how to win Hira's heart by mimicking Sungjo's actions. At one point, she even suggested Kyung-soo try giving Hira a kiss and showed him how Sungjo did it. Unfortunately, when they were practicing, some tennis club members misunderstood their intentions and thought they were kissing. Not long after, gossip began to spread. When Sungjo arrived, he heard the rumors about Hae-ni kissing Kyung-soo, thinking that Hae-ni had moved on from him. Despite hearing the gossip, Sungjo chose to ignore it. Then, after receiving advice from Hae-ni, Kyung-soo gathered the courage to express his feelings to Hira. However, he became too nervous to speak, and Hira decided to walk away. Hae-ni, witnessing this, grew annoyed and tried to help Kyung-soo by hitting him, but he stopped her, and they ended up hugging in the middle of the field. This led many students to believe they were in a romantic relationship. The next day, word started spreading around campus about Hae-ni and Kyung-soo, and it became the talk of the town. Surprisingly, rumors about their closeness made Sungjo look pretty down all day. Hira noticed this and figured he must be feeling blue, because the girl who always chased him was now dating someone else. However, Sungjo didn't say a word to Hira, even when Hae-ni came over to clarify the gossip that was going around. Sadly, he didn't even glance at Hae-ni and just said goodbye to Hira before walking away. Hira couldn't help but smile when she saw Sungjo treating Hae-ni so coldly, but Hae-ni felt really sad and confused about how to clear up the rumors about her. On another occasion, Hae-ni wanted to explain to Sungjo that she had no romantic involvement with Kyung-soo, but she couldn't muster the courage to reach out to him. At the same time, Sungjo was at the library when he noticed his phone vibrating and saw a missed call from Hae-ni. He didn't pay much attention to it and went back to his studies. Soon after, Hae-ni was trying to visit Sungjo at his home. As she stood in front of his door, she suddenly heard something falling inside the house. Panicked, she rushed in and found Eunjo in pain after a fall. Without hesitation, she used Sungjo's landline to inform him about his younger brother's accident and quickly called an ambulance to take Eunjo to the hospital. After some time, when Eunjo was discharged from the hospital, Sungjo came to pick up both Eunjo and Hae-ni to go home. When they arrived home, to Hae-ni's surprise, Sungjo and Ki-dong's parents threw a welcoming party because Hae-ni was going to live with them again. She was thrilled to be returning to live with the man she loved. In the evening, she had a conversation with Sungjo, who was sitting outside the house. There he confessed that he didn't mind her staying with them. Hae-ni felt happy upon hearing this, and Sungjo couldn't help but steal glances at her. The next day on campus, Hae-ni greeted and waved at Sungjo, but he acted coldly towards her, leaving her confused about his sudden change in behavior. Meanwhile, Hira saw Sungjo and invited him to chat in the park. He opened up to her and felt like they had a lot in common, almost as if they were meant to be together. Later that evening, Sungjo met with his parents to ask for permission to live on his own. Hearing that, Suchan agreed, but Jung-mi seemed hesitant and thought it might be because of Hae-ni. Then, Sungjo tried to explain to his mother that his decision wasn't solely because of Hae-ni moving back home. On the other hand, Hae-ni overheard their conversation and felt sad because she couldn't see him every day. A few days later, Sungjo, who got permission from his parents, moved out to live on his own. Jung-mi and Eunjo were there to see him off in front of the house, while Hae-ni could only watch him leave from the doorstep. One day, while Hae-ni and Kyung-soo were having a meal at a cafe, they were surprised to see Sungjo working there as a part-time waiter. Seeing him being so independent and looking handsome in his cafe uniform made Hae-ni fall even more in love with him. Shortly after, Sungjo served their orders and left without saying anything to them. While enjoying her meal, Hae-ni noticed a job opening at the cafe and thought about applying so that she could see Sungjo every day. Unfortunately, when she met the cafe manager, he informed her that the position had already been filled by someone else. At the same time, Hira showed up in her waitress uniform. Surprisingly, Hira was the new waitress who had just been hired for the position. Hae-ni was taken aback and felt disappointed because Hira had already secured the job. She could only watch Sungjo and Hira getting closer from a distance until Kyung-soo urged her to go home. On another date, a group of customers came in and placed complicated food orders. They doubted that Sungjo, who was serving them, could remember all the orders without writing them down. To their surprise, Sungjo effortlessly recited all the orders without taking any notes. This left the cafe patrons impressed by his intelligence. Meanwhile, Jung-mi, Hae-ni, and Eunjo pretended to be regular customers at a nearby table just to observe Sungjo. Eunjo was particularly impressed by his ability to remember all the orders correctly. Shortly after, as they were about to place their own order, Sungjo approached them and realized that they had come to the cafe on purpose to see him. There, Hae-ni quickly apologized to him, and Hira also came over, surprising Jung-hee to see him working at the same place as her son. A few days later, Hae-ni, who always wanted to see Sungjo, ended up at the cafe by accident. She fell asleep and was awakened by a waiter telling her that the cafe would be closing soon. Not willing to give up, Hae-ni decided to wait for Sungjo outside the cafe. Eventually, she saw him returning with Hira to an apartment. Then she decided to follow them to find out where Sungjo had been living, but to her dismay, she watched them enter the same apartment. There, Hae-ni began to think that Sungjo was living with Hira and started imagining what might be going on between them. The next day, Hae-ni tried once more to meet Sungjo at the cafe to give him the chocolate she had made. She had to take a taxi because it was raining. Unfortunately, the taxi broke down on the way, so Hae-ni had to continue her journey on foot. When Sungjo arrived at the cafe, he was taken aback to see Hae-ni all wet from the rain, shivering with cold. Hira, who noticed her struggle, playfully teased her for braving the rain just to see Sungjo. Meanwhile, Sungjo couldn't help but look surprised, as if he couldn't believe Hae-ni had come back to see him. Soon after, Hae-ni took a seat, and Hira asked her why she had come to the cafe. Hae-ni explained that she just wanted to give Sungjo a box of chocolates she had made. Hearing this, Hira quickly offered her a warm drink. As Hae-ni sipped the drink, she suddenly got a stomachache. Shortly after, Sungjo appeared with a towel to help dry her off and urged her to go home immediately. After he left, Hae-ni tried to stand but suddenly fainted, causing Sungjo and the other cafe staff to rush and carry her into a room. When Hae-ni regained consciousness, she found herself in the cafe manager's room, who then asked Sungjo to take her home. However, Hira didn't seem to like the idea, and Sungjo apologized to her for leaving her to work alone. Hee criticized Hae for always bothering people. Afterwards, Sungjo accompanied Hae to try and get a taxi so she could go home. But due to the rain, they couldn't find one. So he decided to take her to his apartment while waiting for his mother to pick her up. At that time, Hae was thrilled to finally know where he lived. Upon arriving at Sungjo's apartment, Hae was impressed by how tidy it was. She was even happier when he told her that she was the first person to enter his room. Hae felt relieved to learn that Hee didn't live with him. Sungjo then called his mother to pick up Hae, but Jung-hee, who was delighted to see her son with Hae, refused his request and invited Hae to stay at the apartment. At night, Sungjo reluctantly gave in and slept on the floor, giving his bed to Hae. However, he couldn't sleep well on the hard floor, so he eventually went upstairs and slept next to Hae. She felt happy that night, while Sungjo couldn't sleep peacefully. In the morning, Hae woke up and noticed Sungjo wasn't beside her. He had woken up early to read the newspaper. He mentioned that he couldn't sleep well because of her, making Hae feel sorry for him. They had breakfast together without saying much. Sungjo was engrossed in the newspaper, and Hae didn't want to disturb him with conversation. After they finished breakfast, Hae helped Sungjo choose his outfit for the day. He reminded her not to watch while he changed, which embarrassed Hae, so she turned around with a smile. Meanwhile, Sungjo secretly smiled at Hae's actions. They left together, and when they arrived at campus, they saw many students reading a poster that claimed Sungjo and Hae had spent the night together. Sungjo was clearly annoyed by the poster and confronted his mother, who was pretending to be a student with glasses. He expressed his anger towards Jung-hee for creating the poster and then walked away. Soon after, Hae approached Jung-hee, who seemed pleased with spreading gossip about her son and Hae. During that time, Jung-hee asked Hae about the events of the previous night. Hae explained that nothing had happened between her and Sungjo, which left Jung-hee disappointed. When Sungjo entered the classroom, he became the center of attention because of the poster his mother had made. Sitting next to him, Hee heard Sungjo clarify that nothing had occurred between him and Hae the previous night. In the evening, after Sungjo had finished his activities and showered, he opened the box of chocolates made by Hae and found a greeting card. It made him smile with happiness. Curious about the chocolates, he tasted one and was surprised that they didn't taste great. Nevertheless, he appreciated the gesture and smiled at the thought behind them. Another day, while Hae was collecting tennis balls after club practice, a guy named Kim Jae-tae approached her and confessed his love. Kyung-soo, who saw this, also confessed his love for Hae, mentioning that she already had feelings for someone else. Despite this, Jae-tae insisted on expressing his feelings and getting to know her better, shaking her hand. During that moment, Hae felt uneasy and quickly let go of Jae-tae's hand. Soon after, Kyung-soo introduced Jae-tae, a senior from the tennis club, to the new club members. There, he wondered why Jae-tae, who had just met Hae, was so confident in asking her out on a date. It turned out Jae-tae had been noticing Hae, who had been chasing after Sungjo since high school. He knew that they didn't have a special relationship, so he had the courage to ask her out. After expressing his interest, Jae-tae smiled at Hae and left the tennis court. Hae was still surprised by the date invitation, especially since it was the first time she felt acknowledged by someone. After the incident, Ju-rang and Minna deliberately approached Sungjo and informed him that Hae had received a date invitation from their senior. Unfortunately, he simply replied that he didn't mind, and then he left them. Hae, who was hiding nearby, felt sad hearing his response. On another occasion, Jae-tae approached Hae, who was sitting alone, and she asked him why he had come over. There, he admitted that he had been paying attention to Hae, who never gave up on pursuing Sungjo's heart, even though Sungjo often treated her coldly. Jae-tae fell for her determination and wanted to get to know her better. In the evening, Hae returned to the cafe where Sungjo worked. When he came to take her order, Jae-tae suddenly arrived and apologized for being late. Hae had chosen this cafe on purpose to have a meal with him, hoping to make Sungjo jealous. However, she was disappointed when Sungjo's reaction seemed normal. After they finished eating, Hae and Jae-tae decided to take a walk in the park. During their time together, Hae noticed Jae-tae's sincerity, but it made her feel guilty because she was only pretending to be cheerful around him. She also felt guilty for using Jae-tae to make Sungjo jealous. Because of this, she decided to end it by telling Jae-tae not to expect anything more from her. The following day, Hae was in the library, sneakily observing Sungjo as he studied. She got a surprise when Jai-ta and Jun-gu started arguing over her. Hae-nae attempted to break up the fight, but it didn't work. Then Sung-jo arrived, embraced Hae-nae, and confidently stated that even if Jai-ta and Jun-gu fought, she would still choose him. This declaration annoyed both Jai-ta and Jun-gu, and they stopped their argument. When the semester break came, Hae-nae had a hard time finding Sung-jo. He seemed to have disappeared because he no longer attended tennis practice and had quit his job at the cafe. Unexpectedly, he had taken on a new part-time job as a tour guide. At that time, Hae-nae heard about this from Kyung-soo and went to where Sung-jo worked, accompanied by Eun-jo, who was excited to see his older brother. When Sung-jo learned that Kyung-soo had told Hae-nae about his job, he became annoyed with him for continuously making excuses. Shortly after, Hira suddenly pushed Hae-nae to stand next to Sung-jo. Hae-nae was surprised and irritated with Kyung-soo, who had secretly informed Hira about Sung-jo's new job. Nevertheless, Kyung-soo tried to calm her down by suggesting a game that required them to pair up. Hae-nae would have the chance to be with Sung-jo, while he would pair up with Hira. Soon after, Kyung-soo gathered all the tour participants, including Hira, to play a game. Unfortunately, when he explained the rules, the participants seemed uninterested, and Hae-nae was the only one who clapped, leading Eun-jo to think she was silly. As the game was about to start, Hira and the others noticed that Sung-jo had left, but they decided to proceed without him. Hae-nae ended up paired with Eun-jo for a game that involved collecting stamps in various predetermined locations in the forest. Hae-nae was delighted when she found a stamp, while Eun-jo, who had little interest in the game, remained indifferent. Meanwhile, Kyung-soo, paired with Hira, offered to carry her to prevent her from getting tired while exploring the forest. However, she declined and began to suspect that he had designed the game to be alone with her. However, Kyung-soo tried to deny these accusations, but when Hira walked away, he playfully threw a bug at her, which startled her and led her to run into his arms. At that time, he felt quite pleased that his plan was working smoothly until they heard the howling of a wolf, which scared Hira once again. On the other hand, Hae-nae and Eun-jo were also startled by the howling and hurried to finish the game. Unfortunately, Hae-nae wasn't being careful and ended up falling into a ravine in the forest. At the same time, Kyung-soo and Hira continued searching for stamps until they completed the game and left the forest. Hira, upon spotting Sung-jo sweeping in the park at the forest's edge, let go of Kyung-soo and approached Sung-jo, complaining about the game Kyung-soo had devised. At that moment, Sung-jo asked Kyung-soo about Hae-nae and Eun-jo's whereabouts, but Kyung-soo told him that they should have already come out of the forest. Sung-jo, becoming worried as he hadn't seen Hae-nae and Eun-jo leave the forest, rushed in to search for them. While on his way, he heard Hae-nae scream, causing him to panic even more, and he ran toward the sound. To his surprise, he discovered that Eun-jo had also fallen into the ravine, and Sung-jo rescued both of them. The following morning, Hae-nae was seen strolling around the inn, enjoying the fresh air and sitting on a park bench. Soon after, Sung-jo approached her and kissed her. Shortly after, Hae-nae, who was still on the park bench, woke up from her nap and wondered if she had merely dreamt the kiss with Sung-jo. From a distance, Eun-jo secretly observed his older brother kissing her, confirming that it was not a dream. In the evening, Sung-jo took Eun-jo and Hae-nae home and then bid farewell to Jung-hee to head back to his apartment. There, she suggested that her son stay at home because it was late, but Sung-jo insisted on going to his apartment to study. The next night, Hae-nae spotted Sung-jo sitting alone on a park bench and joined him. Sung-jo revealed that he intended to major in medicine, pursuing his dream of becoming a doctor. He asked her to keep this secret, and then he bid her farewell. Hae-nae felt happy that he'd tell her a secret he hadn't shared with anyone else. The next day, Sung-jo met with Soo-chang, who had learned from the campus about his son's decision to major in medicine. Shortly after, Sung-jo confirmed his choice, determined to become a doctor. However, Soo-chang opposed this decision, hoping that Sung-jo would continue the family business. On the other hand, Jung-hee and Eun-jo were secretly listening to a heated argument. Suddenly, Soo-chang suffered a heart attack, causing panic among Sung-jo and the others. At the hospital, Sung-jo talked to the doctor treating Soo-chang, who realized that Sung-jo knew how to treat his father's illness. When Sung-jo entered his father's room, he found Mr. Kang, a manager at Soo-chang's company, discussing business matters. At that time, Sung-jo was concerned about Soo-chang's health, but still pushed himself to work. Eventually, he made the decision to take over Soo-chang's company and manage his father's responsibilities until he recovered. knowing that Jimmy was thrilled that her son was willing to help the family business. A while later, Sungjo finally arrived at his father's company and was taken aback by the chaotic office environment. Kang then introduced Sungjo to all the employees as the new director. As Kang escorted Sungjo to his office, some female employees couldn't help but admire Sungjo's good looks and above-average intelligence. Inside his new office, Kang handed Sungjo a stack of files containing information about the company and its ongoing projects. With a strong desire to help his father's company recover, Sungjo decided to take all the work home and labor late into the night. Hina caught a glimpse of him working and, not wanting to disturb him, quietly closed his bedroom door. The following day, while Sungjo was at the hospital with his father, Kang approached him to discuss something on the rooftop. There, Kang informed Sungjo about a meeting with an investor who wanted to introduce him to his granddaughter. Sungjo was surprised and wondered if it was an arranged marriage. Then, Kang explained that the company needed significant funds from investors, so Sungjo's participation in the meeting was crucial to save the company. On the day of the meeting, Sungjo drove his car to the restaurant where he was supposed to meet Mr. Yoon, the investor, and his granddaughter Hira. When Sungjo walked into the meeting room, he was surprised to find Hira there, who greeted him with a smile. After they all sat down, Hira mentioned that she didn't expect Sungjo to be her grandfather's choice for her, because he usually turned down the matchmaking attempts her grandfather arranged. At that time, Yoon didn't realize that Hira and Sungjo already knew each other, so he thought he had made the right choice. When they were about to order food, Hira easily picked dishes for Sungjo, knowing he didn't like oily food. Their closeness made Yoon happy, and he suggested they get married right away. Hearing that, Hira laughed at her grandfather's suggestion, while Sungjo felt confused by the unexpected situation. After the meeting, Sungjo and Hira went to the park to talk about what had happened. Hira revealed that she didn't think Sungjo could impress her grandfather, and she initially refused the match. However, after Yoon showed her a photo of Sungjo, she changed her mind and decided to go to the meeting. Then Sungjo asked if he should marry her to secure funding for his family's company, and Hira understood that he didn't want to go through with the marriage. As they strolled through the park, Hira expressed relief at discovering that Sungjo was the person her grandfather had chosen for the match, as they had known each other for a long time, and she had secretly liked him all along. Hearing her explanations, Sungjo finally agreed to give a special relationship a try. Hira was thrilled to hear that the man she liked was willing to date her. Then, after Sungjo returned home, Jung-hee, who had heard about the matchmaking, wanted to talk to her son, but Sungjo refused and headed straight to his room. Another time, Hae-ni tried to discuss Sungjo and Hira's marriage with him. During that conversation, Sungjo confirmed the news and expressed his decision to marry Hira before retreating to his room. Hae-ni, who had heard Sungjo's confession, looked sad and began to cry. Meanwhile, Nunjo secretly observed her crying after talking to Sungjo, while Sungjo remained in his room, reflecting on what he had just told Hae-ni. Sometime later, Hae-ni decided she shouldn't let herself be upset by the situation. She opened her heart to Jung-gu, a guy who had liked her sincerely since high school. At that time, she met with him and agreed to date him, which made Jung-gu pleasantly surprised that his efforts to win her heart had paid off. One morning, Sungjo was taken aback when Hae-ni didn't join him for breakfast as usual. Eunjo informed him that she had gone on a date with a new guy. This news surprised Sungjo, and he couldn't believe it was coming from his younger brother. In the afternoon, Sungjo and Hira went on a date to a park to watch a clown show. While there, he saw people playing badminton, which reminded him of the time when Han-ni had angrily swung her tennis racket in the air during a game. He was annoyed. When the clown show ended, everyone applauded except Sungjo, who was lost in thought, thinking about Hae-ni. In the evening, Hira and Sungjo went to a cafe by the Han River to enjoy the night view of the city. There, Hira noticed that Sungjo often drifted off in thought, realizing that he was thinking about something else. She then invited him to her place. Then, as they were getting ready to leave the cafe, they bumped into Han-ni and Jung-gu, who were on a date. Sungjo was quite surprised and wanted to make sure that Han-ni and Jung-gu were really a couple. Jung-gu confirmed their romantic relationship and even displayed affection for Hae-ni after Sungjo casually mentioned that he was dating Hira. Hira, holding onto Sungjo's arm, suggested a double date, but Sungjo declined, saying he didn't want to go with someone so bothersome. Jung-gu didn't take kindly to Sungjo's comment and almost got into a fight if Han-ni hadn't intervened and asked him to leave. During this time, Hira noticed Sungjo's sad expression as he didn't want to lose Hana. Later, as they rushed to the car, Sungjo opened the door for Hira, but she playfully revealed herself as Hani, thinking Sungjo might treat her differently. She asked Sungjo why he treated Hani differently, but he couldn't give her a clear answer. Hira expressed her desire to be treated the same way as Hani, who seemed special to him. In response, Sungjo simply smiled. Meanwhile, in her room, Hani pondered Jungu's proposal. A few days later, Sungjo was at a clothing store with Hira, helping her pick out new clothes. At the same time, Hana was walking alone, lost in thought about Jungu, who had always been kind to her even though she didn't have any romantic feelings for him. However, her daydreaming caused her to accidentally bump into a man, causing her bag to fall. To her surprise, Hira, who was with Sungjo, quickly helped Hani pick up her bag. Hana was taken aback to see Hira with Sungjo, who didn't seem to pay much attention to her. There, he simply walked away, and Hira followed him. Later that evening, Hani met Jungu at a cafe to discuss their relationship. It started raining heavily with lightning, startling her and causing her to fall from her seat. Jungu tried to help her. Seeing Jungu's concern, Hani felt even more guilty and decided to end their relationship. Soon after, she left the cafe without caring about the rain, running to the bus stop to go home. When she reached her stop, she got off the bus and walked towards her house without an umbrella, thinking about how she had hurt Jungu's feelings. On her way home, unexpectedly, Hana encountered Sungjo sitting and waiting for her with an umbrella. She was surprised to see him there, and he explained that he knew she had a habit of not bringing an umbrella during the rainy season. Shortly after, they walked home together, and Sungjo asked Hana about her feelings for Jungu. There, she explained that she was willing to try accepting Jungu, who had liked her for a long time, as she was tired of being treated poorly by Sungjo, who hadn't considered her feelings. Upon hearing this, Sungjo dropped his umbrella and kissed her, revealing that he had feelings for her too. When they arrived home, everyone in the living room was taken aback to see Sungjo and Hani, drenched from the rain. Jungi immediately asked them to change into dry clothes. As they were about to head upstairs, Yeonjo informed Sungjo that Hana and Ki-dong would be moving soon. Hearing that, Sungjo fell silent, but then firmly held Hani's hand and announced his intention to marry her. Everyone was surprised and delighted by this news. At that time, Ki-dong tried to point out Hani's flaws to Sungjo, but Sungjo assured him that he had accepted both her strengths and weaknesses. Eventually, Ki-dong gave his blessing, knowing that his daughter truly liked Sungjo. On the other hand, Jumgi, overjoyed, hugged Hani, and Yeonjo mumbled that she had suspected her older brother's feelings for Hani for a long time. A little later, Hani, standing on the balcony, was surprised to see Sungjo, who couldn't sleep, joining her. The two of them talked about the clear sky after the rain. Not long after, Sungjo was ready to go to sleep, but Hani stopped him because she was worried he might act distant after falling asleep. Sungjo teasingly suggested they sleep together, which made Hani blush. He then embraced her from behind, and they shared their happiness at being with each other. Meanwhile, Junbi secretly took photos of her son spending time with Hani, ignoring Eunjo's attempts to remind her not to do so. The next day, Sungjo met Hira at a park to apologize and explain that he couldn't continue their relationship. Hira, understanding the situation, acknowledged that Sungjo had feelings for Hani for a long time and would eventually realize them. Despite feeling jealous and hurt, she put on a brave smile and congratulated Sungjo and Hani on their relationship. Afterward, Hira channeled her sadness into solo tennis practice, reminiscing about the time she had spent with Sungjo, which only deepened her sadness. Turns out, Kyung-soo appeared to be watching her from the sidelines, and he continued to keep her company as she played until nightfall. When Hira became tired and couldn't hit the ball anymore, she fell down and Kyung-soo approached her to check on her well-being. During that time, Hira noticed the drink Kyung-soo had brought and asked for it because she was thirsty. She sat on the field's edge with Kyung-soo, attempting to open the drink can in his hand. Even though she struggled to open it, she initially refused Kyung-soo's assistance. However, her sadness overwhelmed her, and she ended up crying on his shoulder. He tried to comfort her. A few days later, Soo Chang met with Yoon to apologize for canceling the match between Sungjo and Hee-rae. There, Soo Chang explained that he couldn't force his son's feelings on someone. Meanwhile, in the evening, during dinner together, Jumi asked everyone to keep their schedules clear for the upcoming Wednesday. Unfortunately, Soo Chang and the others already had plans for that day. Nevertheless, Junbi insisted that everyone should free up their schedules, leaving Sungjo curious about what important event his mother had planned for next week. Junbi then revealed that it would be Sungjo and Hanni's wedding party, surprising everyone. Sungjo was also astonished by his mother's decision to set his wedding schedule without consulting him or the others. The following day, as their wedding day approached, Hae-na and Sungjo went to a jewelry store to pick out their wedding rings. However, every ring Hae-na chose, Sungjo turned down, eventually leaving her at the shop. Hae-na felt frustrated that Sungjo couldn't be romantic like most couples about to get married, and she reluctantly followed him out. As they passed a wedding dress shop, Hae-na asked Sungjo to take a look, but he refused, saying it's impractical to buy a dress that would only be worn once. Then, Hae-na tried to convince him, and he suggested she go into the shop alone. Not wanting to choose her wedding dress alone, Hae-na decided to follow Sungjo as they walked away. Along the way, they passed a photo studio, and Hae-na tried to persuade Sungjo to take pre-wedding photos, but he declined. Hae-na grew annoyed with his reluctance to do anything, and Sungjo remarked on how couples often separate before marriage due to differences in principles. Without paying much attention to Hae-na, he walked away, leaving her confused about his wishes. When they got in the car, it seemed like they were still arguing about everything he had rejected. A few days before the wedding, Hae-na and Sungjo seemed to have reconciled. Sungjo invited Hae-na and Ki-dong to visit the graves of Hanni's mother and grandmother. At the grave, Sungjo placed flowers and asked for blessings to marry Hanni, promising to take care of her with all his heart. Soon after, while walking with Hanni, Sungjo informed her that he had asked Kyung-soo to be the MC at their wedding. And had also discussed their honeymoon plans, but Sungjo initially dismissed the idea, which irritated her. Seeing Hanni upset, Sungjo eventually gave in and agreed to take her on a honeymoon to Jeju Island. Hanni, who had been annoyed at first, smiled and became happy with the plan. Sungjo also smiled, delighted to see her so happy about the honeymoon. On their wedding day, Sungjo and his family stood in front of the wedding hall to welcome the invited guests, while Hae-na waited in the bride's room with her friends. At that moment, Hiro arrived to congratulate Hanni and admired her beauty in the wedding dress. At that time, she expressed her happiness that Sungjo had chosen Hanni as his wife and wished him to find his life partner soon. Shortly after, Kyung-soo, the host, called upon all the invited guests to enter the wedding hall as the blessing event was about to begin. Hanni, still in the bride's room with Sungjo, looked quite nervous and held his hand tightly. When the event commenced, Hae-na walked into the hall alongside Ki-dong, accompanied by two of her friends. At that time, Sungjo beamed with happiness as he saw Hae-na looking stunning in her wedding dress. After they exchanged their sacred vows, Sungjo placed the ring on Hanni's finger. However, when it was her turn to put the ring on his finger, she was nervous and accidentally dropped it, causing laughter among the invited guests. Ki-dong found the ring and handed it to Hanni, who then successfully placed it on Sungjo's finger. At that moment, Sungjo whispered softly to her, playfully calling her stupid. Hearing that, Hanni felt a bit annoyed, but decided to tease him, who had liked her for a long time. She surprised everyone by kissing him right in front of all the invited guests. Deep down, Sungjo looked a bit embarrassed, especially as the guests laughed and found Hanni's behavior entertaining. Meanwhile, Jeong-gu, who also attended Hanni's wedding, couldn't hold back his tears as the woman he loved had become someone else's wife. A few days after their wedding party, Hae-na and Sungjo were on their honeymoon in Jeju Island, enjoying the beautiful beach views from the car. When they reached their accommodation, Hae-na was overjoyed to be on this honeymoon with the man she had loved for so long. They went on a leisurely walk to explore the island's tourist attractions and savor their holiday together. The following day, Hae-na was getting ready for a walk when a man knocked on their bedroom door, seeking help for his wife in pain. Soon after, they hurried to the couple's room, and using his knowledge as a medical student, Sungjo began to examine the woman. Hae-na, seeing her husband tending to another woman, felt a twinge of jealousy. Sungjo scolded her, explaining that he considered the woman as a patient in need of immediate help. Hearing that, Hae-na felt saddened by his words and decided to return to their room. Meanwhile, the woman who had been in pain suddenly woke up and playfully teased Sungjo while mocking Hae-na. Sungjo felt annoyed because he was being played with, and he defended Hae-na, describing her as a respectable woman who didn't deserve to be mocked. Later, Sungjo tried to make amends with Hae-na by approaching her on a park bench, but she, still upset, moved away from him. Then, he tries to cheer her up by tickling her, until she finally smiled again. In the evening, Hae-ni apologized to Sung-jo for her unwarranted jealousy. Sung-jo, in response, found her apology cute and expressed how much he missed her. After their honeymoon, they were seen riding bicycles to return to their campus and continue their studies. During this time, he greeted them and then had a discussion with Sung-jo about Hae-ni's pursuit of a nursing degree, while Sung-jo was on his way to becoming a doctor. At that time, Hiro was impressed by Hae-ni's dedication and her desire to always be by Sung-jo's side. Some time later in their room, Sung-jo helped Hae-ni prepare for her nursing exam by asking her various questions and even practicing CPR, using her as a training partner. However, Hae-ni's nervousness made Sung-jo's attempts to help more annoying than helpful. Not long after, Young-jo interrupted them when he opened the door to their room, asking them to keep it down as he was studying. Feeling shy, Sung-jo and Hae-ni apologized for the disturbance. Another day, Hae-ni was busy selecting clothes in a bag for her dinner date with Sung-jo. In a hurry, she rushed to the restaurant but got delayed because she had to help a woman in need of first aid. Using her nursing knowledge, Hae-ni provided assistance and accompanied the woman to the hospital. However, she was distressed to realize she was late for her dinner with Sung-jo, and the restaurant had closed. As she left, she was pleasantly surprised to find Sung-jo waiting for her, worried about her silence. She explained what had happened, and they hugged. In the final scenes, he revisits a military service camp, bringing a lot of food for Kyung-soo. Meanwhile, Sung-jo and Hae-ni spend time together in a car, where he expresses his love for her. The series ends. The moral lesson from the series is in life. Remember that even the most serious doctors can end up as goofy CPR partners, and missing dinner dates can lead to surprise romantic moments.